Our speaker today is Kevin Graham, who's president of the Fraternal Order of Police. Kevin has spent most of his time either as a patrol officer or walking the beats up in Uptown. He has served in the position of president of the Chicago Lodge of the FOP for the last 2 years. Kevin grew up in Skokie, Illinois. He attended the Embry-Riddle University, where he majored in aeronautical engineering. Kevin has earned degrees in law enforcement and public administration, and a master's degree in public policy from Northwestern. While he was at Northwestern, his master's thesis was helping the mentally ill in Cook County and using the mental health courts to alleviate the clogging up of the court system. Kevin's goal was to get people who needed to be in the hospital to the hospital instead of to correctional facilities. And he was very smart today to bring with him his sister, who helped him grow up and kept him in line, and Angela Graham. If he gets out of line, you'll contact the younger brother who's in plumbing and tell him to go over there and loosen a few joints in the Graham household, okay? Okay, we thank you. Kevin, we're ready for you. Remember, if anybody has a question they would like to ask of Kevin, fill it out and our staff will be around to collect it both during and after the program. So, Kevin, we're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. My wife would have been here, but she is a doctor, and she had too many patients, and she just couldn't be here. But she would have liked to have been, and I wish she could have been. First of all, it was a very nice introduction. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be a Chicago police officer. You get to make the difference in somebody's life every single day for the better. And in every single call you get to go on, you get to try and help somebody. And that's a wonderful thing to spend your life doing. I'd also like to make sure that I acknowledge my staff over here from FOP, Marty, Rich, Bob, Kathy, who without Kathy, I'd never make it anywhere on time. So thank you, and I know we have other board members, Dan and Kenny. Thanks for being here. You know, the emblem, the symbol on our logo is in Latin, and it translates to "Law is a safeguard of freedom." You know, I thank you for having me here today to talk about FOP and my members. There's a lot of common issues, and I'll try and touch on them today. I know many people would like to talk about the allegations of police misconduct or corruption. These are allegations. Many of them are false. But what has happened in the last few years in the city of Chicago is that they have talked about police reform. And one of the things that needs to take place when you have police reform is you have to have the FOP at the table. Because otherwise you are repeating the same mistakes that have been made. That you don't have a buy-in from the police officers, and you also want to hear from the community, because the community support is ultimately very important. You know, there has been many things that have talked about police reform. New equipment, new policies. We're now facing a consent decree. I've been told that the consent decree is going to cost over $500 million to enforce. That does not include a new police academy, and if they have additional police oversight, that's also going to cost more. We don't need additional police oversight. What we need is to have collaborative efforts. That is what will change in the city of Chicago. Simply checking off boxes in a consent decree does not make the community safer. It does not make police officers safer. One of the policies that they want to change is to have a policy in which we report every time we pull out our gun and point it at someone. This is an officer safety issue that the FOP was not included at the table at. However, the judge has said in the consent decree that they do need to negotiate this with us. So there's a lot of complicated issues that are going on. One of the problems with either a consent decree or changing policies is that we don't want to handcuff the police. We want them to be able to do their job. One of the ways to do that is to support the police and support the goals and missions that they have set out for themselves. By simply changing policies or taking on a position that has decided by many people who are civilians and not police professionals, you lead to problems that have occurred in the past. We closed 3 police stations, we reduced the police force by over 1,000 people, and those led to problems that we are facing today. And that's why I have started off by telling you about having the FOP at the table so that we can have a voice in how this goes forward. Collaborative efforts are certainly the way that we need to go. But I really want to talk about the 99.5% of my members who do an extremely difficult job every day and night. You wouldn't believe the stories that I hear that don't make it on the media. You know, part of the problem is that the media puts out stories that are sensational, not necessarily accurate, and not necessarily good about the police. But the stories that these officers do every single day and night is amazing. And they're heroes. And I'm so proud to be the leader of the FOP. We do need change. We do need change in this police department. We can't have officers sitting around without vehicles to go out on patrol. We can't have equipment that doesn't work. We can't have computers that don't work in the cars or that are missing down for repairs. I will say that there has been an unprecedented amount of communication between this superintendent and the FOP over the last 2 years. We haven't always agreed on things, and we are still working on better communication. But there has been a better step in the direction that we need to be for everyone in the city of Chicago. Chicago police officers want to get criminals off the street. They want to make sure that they have been, that you and your families go home and you're safe, and that they go home at the end of the tour in one piece. That also means that when we arrest people, they need to stay in jail. We cannot have charges dropped against people. We need to make sure that when criminals are arrested, that they pay the consequence. Otherwise, the law has no meaning. We must make sure that people who can go into their neighborhoods, whatever neighborhood you are in this city, and that you are safe. So that when you go shopping downtown, that you're not faced with people who are going to be doing what they call wilding. When you go into your neighborhoods, that somebody isn't going to catch a stray bullet. Now, several months ago, we proposed a community effort between the Chicago Police Department and some reverends, one of which comes from Atlanta, and we're trying to put that together, and it hasn't materialized. So we all, at the FOP, we sat down and we talked about where we could go with community efforts. And although I'm not ready to start talking about where we're going to be going, I do believe that in the first part of June, we will be unveiling a new initiative in community and police involvement so that there's a bigger trust factor that is being built between the Chicago Police Department and the communities in which we serve. You know, In 1915, two police officers in Pittsburgh, Officers Nagel and Toole, decided that working 12 hours a day, 365 days a year, was just too much to ask for police officers. And so those two and 21 others met on May 14th, 1915, and that was the first meeting of the Fraternal Order of Police, Fort Pitt, Lodge 1. Out of that, what they asked for was to have better working conditions. They wanted time off with their families. They wanted to make sure that they could serve the community and they weren't exhausted. That was over 100 years ago. One of the things that they found when they did that, when the people of Pittsburgh gave them a notice that they would be treated fairly, that they would be able to go out and have time with their families, suddenly an unexpected consequence occurred. The confidence in the police shot up because they were suddenly treated fairly. And in turn, people around the city were also treated fairly. It was an amazing time for police and for the Fraternal Order of Police to get started. Now, it's been over 100 years, and unfortunately, we are still taking a look at people who don't have enough time off with their families. There was one officer who worked 363 days out of 365 in a year. That's too many hours that people put towards the career. Now, I know we have to protect this city, but we also have to make sure that the mental health and the stress of the officers are taken into account. We need to address those things, and we need to address them now. As you've seen, over the last couple of years, we have seen police officers who are unable to cope with the stress and the difficulties of this job. And let me tell you, you never forget the things that you have seen on this job. The things I saw 35 years ago are still there, and I still think of them often. Those are things that we have to have good treatment from employee assistance and the mental health, and it was one of the first things I talked about with the superintendent when I met him 2 years ago. Hopefully next month, they will be hiring a number of clinicians. I have been told that it's going to occur. I don't think we passed them out, but I will make sure that they're passed out. I wanted to make sure that you understood what our symbol for the FOP is. And what it is we have, the colors are gold, blue, and white. The gold represents the points in the position that we are in serving the community. The blue represents the thin blue line between criminals and the public. The eye that is there is ever vigilant, watching over the public to making sure that everyone is safe. And the white represents the purity, that we shall not let people who would go and put corruption into our order, and we will keep them out and allow this organization to maintain its high standards. I do want to tell you about a story. There was a woman who had always had a small car, and she bought a larger car, and for the first time she drove it downtown, and she found a spot that was just big enough for the car. And as she's putting the car into the parking spot, she looked over and she saw two police officers watching her. Now, she carefully put the car into the spot, and she did it on one try and did it perfectly. So as she got out of the car and she walked over to the parking meter, the officer said, "No, let me," and he put the coins into the parking meter. And she said, "Officer, you don't have to do that." And he said, "Yes, I do. I lost the bet." So she turned back to him And she said, all you have to do is have faith. What I'm asking you to do is have faith that we are going to make sure that this city is going to work together to try and reduce crime so that all neighborhoods in this city are safe. Thank you, and I'm ready for any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. A little water in case you'd like some.
Thank you.
And if anyone I see Amanda, who's our executive director, is coming around picking up some questions. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so here we go. By the way, if you ever want to submit a question, you're not going to be able to be here in person, you can email them to us, and we will include you in the Q&A session. This is from Julius Lesser, who's with Winston and Strawn, LLP, City Club member. His question is, hasn't the prohibition against stop and frisk increased the crime and murder rates in Chicago?
The prohibition, okay. The question is about when we stop people, and yes, we unfortunately, when we stop less people, that is going to add to the crime rate. We certainly were against it. We have certainly tried to have a collaborative effort when we are addressing the bills down in Springfield. Unfortunately, the city of Chicago entered into an agreement with the ACLU, and we are stuck with what are called the contact cards that we make out on people. And I think there's, and certainly if the gang database question is brought up, I'll certainly discuss that as well. However, it is a problem, and we need to reduce the forms, the length of the forms, so that we can stop more people. And we have to do that in order to cut down on the crime, because the crime is going up.
Okay. This is from City Club member Pam Sandin. Pam, where are you? Right back there. She's with the NAACP Southside Branch. What effect, if any, does the consent decree have on the collective bargaining agreement?
This is just lunch, not dinner. However, I will try and give you as brief an answer as I can. There are a number of things that the city has asked for in contract negotiations, and many of those things were outlined in the consent decree. What the judge in this case has said is that they have to come back and bargain with us over those items. Now, the city is, believe me, using their best faith efforts, and nobody is going to deny that the city is using their best faith efforts. However, what we have to do is we have to come up with reasonable policies that don't put officers in their safety in jeopardy, and what we have to do is move our abilities to fight crime further along. So specifically to your question as to how this will affect us, I have a feeling we are going to be going back in front of the federal judge quite often for him to make some of those decisions. We are certainly in contract negotiations, and the city is well aware of what they need to ask for, and I think that they have asked for most of the things that are in that consent decree.
Okay, thank you. This should be no surprise to you, Kevin, but we have a few questions here about It's Jay. Okay. Tell him everything's going okay. You know, our president, Jay Doherty, isn't with us today. He has a very special meeting that he's attending, and although he claims he's a great delegator, he's kind of a micromanager in some ways. Anyhow, thank you, Mr. Langto. Should be no surprise, there are a couple questions here about the relationship between the police department, police officers, the FOP, and the current state's attorney. And this is from City Club member David Shestokas. What is the single most frustrating policy of the current state's attorney for police officers?
The single.
Well, we've got some other questions.
You know, I can tell you what the most widely impact. I mean, certainly it is frustrating when people are let out of prison who clearly have committed the crimes, and then they go for certificates of innocence, and then they file lawsuits against the city and police officers. So there is certainly that is probably the largest and most damaging to us. Widespread, it is certainly when you don't enforce some of the laws like shoplifting, because it's almost impossible to get convicted of shoplifting in this city, in this county. The threshold is just too high, and we have to go back and face the merchants. And the merchants don't want to hear that we're letting people back out and that the criminals are coming back to steal from them again. Our hands are tied on that. It's up to the prosecution. I do recognize that the FOP has been outspoken on our criticisms of the state's attorney's office. We do believe that those are justified. We asked for an investigation. We did so because we felt that there was some improprieties going on. And we did that long before charges were dropped against the actor in that well-known case. And I'm not going to use their names. Those names have been used enough. But we certainly are on top of these things. And, you know, I have to give credit. I have to give credit to Martin Prybe, who's an author, who stays on top of these cases relentlessly and spends so much of his own time looking out after each and every detail that goes into these cases, because we would not be as effective if we didn't have him.
Thank you, Kevin. And Martin, where are you at? Right over there, Marty Prybe, okay. This question is from Dwayne Deskins over there. He's a former federal prosecutor. Don't let that get you upset or nervous. Annually, CPD officers are required to undergo firearm training. Do you or would you support mandatory annual mental health testing to assure the public and police officers that they understand threats before they might shoot?
That's an easy question. The idea here is that I don't think that necessarily the two need to be tied together when you're talking about people's firearms and their mental health. We have already not only asked for a bill in Springfield to make police officers aware of officers who may be thinking about suicide, and to identify those. And so make that a mandatory part of their training, and that would be on an annual basis. So, and that was a bill that was introduced by FOP, and we're trying to get it through the Springfield now. In fact, when I leave here today, I'll be driving down to Springfield to try and lobby for some of those bills. We don't have some of the problems that other people have. What we have is depression, and we have also worked at trying to make sure that no matter what the officer needs, that his needs are being met. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And we've also asked in our contract to have a mental health day too. So I think we're addressing that on all fronts.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. This is from City Club member Mel Jones. Mel, where are you? Right in the back, okay. He's a member of the Clark and Division Community Group over in that great 18th District. right by the Mark Twain Hotel. I think I've seen you out there because I hang around there also. He says the Clarkin Division is a loitering hotspot. How can this matter better be addressed? Loitering by a person complaining about selling drugs or drugs activity by a neighbor. So that whole question of loitering, police powers, and so on.
Certainly, the police have been somewhat handicapped by some of the policies that have been put forth over the last few years. I will tell you this, I have been a former foot officer and being in the community most of my career, I had already, and I know that that is a question that had been brought to my office not long ago. I spoke with the commander in 18 about a week ago and suggested to having foot officers up there and creating a new foot post. I do believe that is one of the keys to having better community policing. There's something about an officer that you can walk up to and talk, not somebody driving past on a bicycle or a car that you don't get to see them. It's something that you get to walk up and talk to them. And it's important that that officer is there on a consistent basis. I mean, one of the things that I did in Uptown was not just that I was the police officer there on afternoons. I also was a substitute school teacher in at the local grade school for a few years as well. So people knew me, the kids knew me, the parents knew me, and I had an investment in that community. And I think that is an important factor when you want to try and change the look of crime and the look of the police department.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. This is from Deborah Gittler, right down here. She's with Contextos. Trauma-informed programming that recognizes the cyclical effects of violence. Quote, hurt people, not just guns. Guns are a result, not just the cause. Is increasingly recognized as essential to quelling violence. How is the FOP responding and engaging?
I just want to make sure I have the question correct. You want to know how the FOP is responding to people committing violence against violence in neighborhoods? Is that correct?
No, how are you guys thinking about trauma-informed practicing that recognizes that violence is not necessarily the moment of violence, but something that was caused by trauma?
Can you repeat it for the video?
Okay. I think what we're talking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is part of it is that someone who is committing violence has had violence committed to them earlier in their life, and so that is manifesting it later on, and then we're dealing with it. Is that correct? One of the things that we do need, and believe me, the FOP will support this, is to having better mental health across the state. They have been cutting back in the state on mental health, and unfortunately, a lot of those people wind up in jail. And I know that in the beginning, when they talked about my master's thesis, I talked about getting people who simply needed their medication, keeping them out of the courts and getting them the help they needed. We don't need to tie up resources from the police department and from the courts on that. Getting back to what your specific question is, we actually need to try and have the state fund more of the mental health problems so that there is people who can seek help if they have been the victim of violence earlier in their life, because they need someone to talk to. And whether you talk about whether that's going to be the schools or the police department, we certainly believe that social services need to be beefed up, and that's probably the best place for it.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Debbie, for that good question. This is from Michael Fenstermacher, City Club member. Where is that window maker sitting? Back there. Okay. His question is, and you'll know if these are accurate numbers or not, the CPD makeup is 50% Caucasian, 25% Black, 25% Hispanic. Does limited diversity of FOP leadership, in other words, not enough Blacks or Hispanics, permit your opponents to demagogue the FOP as only representing white officers?
Well, certainly, and I'm not going to call them out, but certainly two of my staff members who are here in the room today are minorities. We certainly want as much involvement from every group. And we have an election. Certainly, there was a number of minorities that ran with me. It's up to the members who elect them. And so that is how we have always addressed it. We certainly make sure that there are people of all diversities, and it's not just of racial. I also made sure that it was, I was instrumental in making sure that there was the first openly gay representative from FOP who was running, and I assisted him in his election. We want diversity from everyone. How people vote, that's their decision, and I'm not here to tell somebody how they should or shouldn't vote, but certainly we always want diversity. And that's always a question about that makeup. But people have to vote, people have to run. We certainly encourage everyone to participate, and we do our best to do that. Thank you.
Is he pretty close on his statistics? 50% Caucasian,
Yes.
25-25?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We have just, actually, we have more Hispanic than we do African American on the department. That's the first time that's changed. So there is a change in the demographics, but it's how we hire and it's who applies.
Okay, this is from Sharon Fairley, who's a University of Chicago Law School member, City Club member, and her question is simply, what is FOP doing to improve police-community relations? And you referred to some initiative that might be coming in June. And what I thought was interesting, Kevin, you mentioned a program led by a religious figure from Atlanta. Why would you go to Atlanta when we have plenty of reverends, ministers, priests, rabbis with programs here in Chicago?
Sure, I'll be glad to bring you up to speed on that. The reason that we had gone to the Reverend Atlanta is that he had already been working with the FOP and the Department of Justice in both Atlanta, in Indianapolis, in Baltimore, and I can't think of the last community. And what it was called One Cop, One Church. And there was some great statistics that came out of that, but it involved the police department and the city hall. And I don't know what happened, but certainly they say they're working on it. I can't wait. So I have worked with some community groups here in the city, on the west side, on the south side, and we're trying to put something together, but I'm not ready to put that out because I'm not the only one involved in that. And as I've already told you, this is about a collaborative effort. It can't be one person getting up here and talking about it. It has to be everybody working together. And so when we are ready to make that announcement, we want everybody there and a diverse community so that you can see that we are making sure that we're trying to cover a lot of the ground in this city and that a lot of people are represented. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Final question. This is from Sabrina Giuntoli. Sabrina, where are you? Right down there. She prints beautifully. We can read the question without Ed making things up. Great. Bottom line, we're coming back to the state's attorney. Come back, Kevin, come on. In what ways do you see opportunities for improving the relationship between FOP members and the Office of the State's Attorney?
What we've asked for from Kim Fox and her office is to prosecute people, not to be the defense attorney. I hope that she suddenly realizes that this is what her job is and that she needs to do it. If she can't, she needs to step down and let somebody else do it. She's not the defense attorney. She's not here to make social change. You do that through legislation, through collaborative efforts, and that's all fine. But she needs to prosecute people because what we have seen is an uptick in crime. We've seen a revolving door at the county jail, and the county jail is becoming like a hockey penalty box. And so in terms of how we can have better relations, it has to start with her doing her job. I love to work with people. I like to try and find new ways to accomplish our goals, but she needs to do her job, or she needs to step aside and let somebody else do it.
Thank you, Kevin.